Welcome back, Inebri-art. This is Andy, your faithful host, as always. And I don't know if you've heard, considering that this is like our third or fourth in this series, but we're doing a small press expo on August 20th. Jeez, did I forget I have it right here. Totally blanked on the date. Yep, August 20th at Mayflower Brewery called Pages and Pints. And today we brought on a author that will be appearing there, Richard. Geez, I asked you about your last name and I stumbled over Richard. Richard Feitelberg, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, actually, I just go by Rich. The book, all
Rich.
my covers say Rich Feitelberg.
All
Richard
right.
Richard sounds way too formal, like a king of England or something. And I'm going, no, I don't
so
want to do that.
so
I'm
just
not.
Rich.
Yeah, I'm. It's to keep it casual and informal, and so people don't think I'm unapproachable.
Okay. Well, you
You
have
know.
a bunch of books. I feel like when we first met, you had maybe just one. I mean, I might be wrong in that,
No,
but
I don't think that's true. I think. Well, when did I show up there?
it was like
I want to say 14,
2018,
15, 16.
something maybe. Yeah, maybe even far back as that.
So
Um,
far because um well, and I'm guessing it was closer to 16 because I didn't start doing stuff until about 2014.
okay.
Okay, my first novel was published by a small press in 2013 or 2012, I guess it was, and they didn't do too well. Folded by 2013. Let me see if I can get the story straight here. It's been 10 years now. Wow. And then I got my rights back about 2014. So sometime that year, I started going to events.
Mm-hmm.
Your event was, and it took me a while to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
I'd never done it before. And your event was some years after that initial. I ended up in the initial one, I think was in Rhode Island, where I made my first sales. And I was going, yeah, okay, I could maybe even do this. Um, and so yours was some years later when I had more of a groove going because it was December,
Yep.
because it was snowing.
Yeah.
It was the holiday season kind of thing.
It was right after
Um
Christmas.
yes, it was right. It was in that weird time between Christmas and New Year's, and I said, geez, this is a weird time because everybody's done their holiday shopping. But people showed up. I even have video. I know I took video of something that from that event I still have on my phone. And I think I made a few sales, such that I think I said I'd do this again, but
Yep.
I haven't because, um, well, I got busy with stuff. I didn't see you. I try to keep track of you. I have to say that sometimes keeping track of what you're doing is
Yep.
difficult. So I didn't see any specific events that were up my line, because I know you do a lot of. You're all over the arts.
Yeah, and that's it's funny because
Yeah,
like I was telling someone the other day that had I a crystal ball and I could look into the future instead of Inebri-art, it would have been Inebri-arts.
yeah,
Because we
and
do
I'm
kind of
not
cover
so.
a lot of things.
Yeah, and so I'm not so sure that an event that's more on the maybe ceramic painting end is more as appropriate as something like we're going to have in August,
Yeah, I'm excited. It's getting a bit
which
of a
is more
buzz.
focused
Yeah.
to those of us who take pen to paper or fingers to keyboard in my case, um, and tell stories.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah,
Like I didn't forget about, but I hadn't thought about that event in a while. That it was Plymouth decided they wanted a first night kind of
okay,
event, but they
okay,
didn't want to do it on New Year's because they were worried about public intoxication. So they called it Winterfest, and it was like the week. It
oh
was like
yeah.
that weird week in between Christmas and New Year's.
It was a weird, but people showed up. I mean,
Oh yeah,
that wasn't the I wasn't sure about that, but the price was right. So that's usually my gating factor is that a lot of these big events cost so much money for a table. I lose money just before I walk in the door.
yeah, and that's one of those things. Like we try to keep that in mind. It's like especially something like a small press expo. You're
Yeah,
already you have your table set up, whatever you have there, your
right,
your cost of your books, and then your
right.
your time, and you're trying to make a living.
Well, I work cheap. I work
uh,
cheap. I always have. Um, um, that precedent started with my grandparents when I worked for food, mowing their lawns and such.
yeah.
I work cheap. On the other hand, that's reasonable compensation because my grandmothers, both of them, were phenomenal cooks.
Oh yeah, I'd work for food if it's good food. Um,
Oh yeah, it was awesome food.
so how many
Uh,
books do you have out now?
how many books? Well, that's a good question. I have to stop to count. See, okay, so let's see. So the original fantasy series of 8 went down to 3 when I sold the rights to that to the series to a small press. So I'm back basically published by a small press again. So I've come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are in London. These guys are doing much better than the first people I hooked up with. Um, um, and so now and the last book came out. What's this? This is June.
Yes.
So that came out in March. There are 3 ebooks. They're big. They're long because I picked or I squished the smaller books into bigger stuff because fantasy readers like big, thick,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or what I refer to as Robert Jordan sized novels.
Yeah.
If, which, if you're familiar with his work, those things are long and big and hairy. Never mind the fact that there's like 14 of them now. Um, but but um, having ebooks didn't do me any good for these events. And now that COVID is sort of done, and see, here's part of my thinking is my thought was when COVID hit, I was about to go to New Hampshire for an
Yeah.
event I had done many times up there at a high school. Then they've been very receptive because um, the students there read this kind of my fantasy stuff all the time. And they were doing cosplay at the same time, and it was a big fantasy kind of thing. I
Oh,
said, I
cool.
fit right in here, beautiful. But when it hit, they canceled everything. Of course, everything got shut down.
Yep.
I looked at this and said, look, I'm not going to be selling books this year unless I go do something. And so, I just happened to trip over the ad of this particular publisher online, and I said, okay, let me submit something. So I did what they said. I submitted the how does this go now? I submitted the query letter, which was mostly an email, with whatever else they wanted. I don't remember now. It was either an outline or the first chapter or the first 3 chapters or whatever that was. And they liked what they saw, and they said send the whole thing, and they really liked it. And I was amazed because generally speaking, that's not the reaction I get to my work when I submit. A lot of stuff goes, it's not quite for us. It's not bad. It's just not quite for us.
Yep.
And finding the right fit can be difficult and can be discouraging for some writers too. So, but I said, look, I expect to fail. If I set that up, then it doesn't feel so bad
Yep.
because the first rejections were nasty. Were very painful. I had to learn not to take it personally. Um, but and then the next thing I know, I'm looking at this publishing contract, and I'm going, okay, well that's cool. But do you just want the first couple that I sent you, or do you want the whole series? He said that they really want the whole series. I said, okay, fine, that's good to know. I was trying to place the whole series, mostly because there's stuff behind it that I'm still trying to get to right other stories in the same in the same world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Different characters, but continuing the story of what's going on there. Um, so then, over the last 2, I guess that was no. So I wrote. I think I got my years mixed up. I'm not sure. I guess I wrote to them in 20, but things didn't come out until 21.
Yeah.
And so the last couple of years, that's what we've been doing. They don't want to just they didn't just want to do all of my stuff because they got other works from other people that are being submitted, of course. So they wanted to give it some time between submissions. Plus, they wanted to see how the book was doing. But it's selling. Um, but now that COVID's sort of over and I can go back to um, my life as it used to be,
Yeah.
I said, well, look, guys, all I have is ebooks now of my fantasy series. That's not going to do any good. I can't sell an ebook to anybody.
Right.
Um, So they agreed that they would break those three books back up into they agreed to take the first book, break it back into the two pieces that I smushed together and print it in paper. And that's going on now. I don't know when I'm going to see anything from them. That's going on now. Meanwhile, I do have all of the old inventory I had before COVID.
Right.
That's what I'm selling at your event in August. So these are the first editions, very rare because they're not going
Collector's
to be
items. Yeah.
bingo.
Yeah.
They're not going to be reprinted at all because the rights are gone. But I have them
Yeah.
in this form because that's what I have. Okay, so I have those novels. Plus, I didn't sit on my hands while everybody was in lockdown. I revised several collections of short stories. So there were four of those. So to answer your question, that's up to seven now. I have, I think, four collections of poetry. One is based on the fantasy world that my novels are on, and the other three are just poetry collections. The last one just came out earlier this year, I think also in March or April. Um, so that's seven, and that's about 11 currently active. And then I got a few other things that are, I got some nonfiction that I'm in the process of revising about comic books, which is a small passion of mine. Since I grew up on them. It's one of the reasons, as I explained in my biography, it's my biographical blurb. It's one of the reasons I write fantasy stories now is because I grew up on a steady diet of comic books and science fiction.
What was your go-to comic? I mean, I was a big comic book fan and I love like fantasy, but I feel like my love of fantasy came from like, movies like Excalibur and Dungeons and Dragons, and like my love of
Well, okay.
superheroes came from comic books.
Well, well. I got introduced to comic books earlier first
Yeah.
during the Silver Age. This is the time I'm old enough. I saw the birth of Marvel,
Yeah.
right, in the 60s, right? So, but we had a smattering of both DC and Marvel. Um, my father, probably because he's old enough, he grew up on the Superman serial
Yep. Sure.
on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was more partial to that. But we had a steady diet of Marvel as well. My love of fantasy comes from Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings,
Yep.
which I read. That became big in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was sort of like rediscovered, if you will, probably because he passed away in 73, I think. And people, this happens. This happens
Brought it to
when
the
some,
limelight. Yeah.
yeah, when he died, when the author dies, it's like, oh, he's dead. What did he do? Look, he did some cool stuff. And then he
Yeah.
gets really popular. And it's like, too bad you didn't figure this out a few years earlier. He could have enjoyed some, you know, yeah. Um,
My love for Tolkien comes from the cartoon.
oh no, no, I read the novels.
Yeah.
Um, then I found out, of course, that um, that Tolkien didn't really invent swords and sorcery so much, although
Mm-hmm.
he's a pioneer in that field. So swords and sorcery, as you see for D&D, comes from the pulps of the 30s, which are little known. The whole Grey Mouser um,
Hmm.
um, series by Fritz Lieber, I think it is.
Gray
Um,
Mouser. Yeah, I've never even heard of that.
yeah, see, I've done my homework here. I had it at some point. I went back and I said, okay, look, let's and I found some really good books on the subject too. Some of them are I was pointed to by other fantasy writers who I've met in the course of doing all of this stuff. Um, there's a very interesting book whose name I've forgotten, but I have a copy of it and I was reading it, and it covers, sort of like the evolution of fantasy um, from its earliest beginnings, like in the days of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
right, with their contemporaries at the beginning of the 20th century, through the pulp era. Pulps are both known for things or for characters like the Shadow,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
crime and mystery, and Doc Savage, which is more science fiction. And the fantasy piece is mostly ignored because I don't know why. It just doesn't get a lot of play. But that's the Fritz Lieber is one of the folks that is holding up that end of the bus. Um, through to its resurgence after Tolkien dies. because once he dies, then lots of folks. I mean, there were other works. There were things in the '60s. Gormenghast comes to mind, which is by a British author, whose name I've forgotten, but I have a copy of that too. And so I went at some point when after doing some of this reading, I went back and found some of these other people to round out my reading, because one of the basic tenets of writing is write what you know, and if you want to write fantasy, you better be reading a lot of it,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, I've read a bunch of more of the contemporary people Andrew Norton, um, what's her name, Catherine Kurtz, Roger Zelazny. Um, uh, those are the more of the where the generation that I've of writers that I'm sort of like hooked into.
Hmm.
And then I found some of the more recent folks, like I said, like Robert Jordan from the '80s and '90s. I think it's mostly '90s. Um, Obviously Harry Potter, which I just happened to trip over one day in, was it Costco? I think it was Costco. I said, "Oh, this looks interesting. I wonder what they did with what they did with it." Didn't realize it was a big deal.
Yeah.
At the time, the phenomenon hadn't really hit in America quite yet, but there were some of the books were sitting there. Um, um, and every so often, I go back and I go try to find other folks. Um, and so now I've writers. Some of these writers include people like Piers Anthony, um, Jim Butcher is actually
Oh, I
doing.
love Jim Butcher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
does
I'm
both
not
books.
I'm a dyslexic person, so reading for me is very tough. But
Yeah,
I
he
I
does.
love his uh Dresden Files.
Yeah, right. That's his fantasy series. Most.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and there's a whole. I have a whole long list of people. Mostly these days, I listen to them more than read them.
sure.
Um, so I have a whole bunch of audiobooks from folks because I couldn't possibly store all of those books physically.
Yeah.
I just
Hmm.
don't have the physical room in my house. That's one reason, and the other reason is um, the it's rare for me to actually crack open a book these days and sit down and actually read it because I'm so busy with all kinds of stuff. I did decide, however, to make an exception. I'm now in the middle of Contact by Carl Sagan,
Yeah.
which you're probably familiar with the movie.
The movie, sure. Yeah,
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 we watched that. It's a favorite of my wife's. We watch it so often. I decided that I wonder if the book, which I knew it was based on, is anything like the movie, because I know the movie pretty well because we've watched it zillions of times, and it's on TV every so often. So we
Jodie Foster, right? Is that?
Right, Jodie
Yep.
Foster. She's playing the lead character. Um, um, and so I found a copy on Amazon, got the book. I'm in the process of reading it. I have to tell you that it's different, partially because the book was published in the mid '80s during the Reagan administration. Okay, the president that you see in the movie is Clinton.
Yeah,
Very
I'm
different
trying to
time.
remember now. I'm like,
Yeah,
I know I've seen it, but it's been so
it
long ago.
yeah, it's a very different time. And the president in the book is female, which we haven't even had a female president yet.
Yeah,
Okay, so you can see that there are Sagan was being optimistic, perhaps.
yeah,
Regardless, it's very interesting and very different. I'm going to see where it goes. It's done well, or it wouldn't have been published, I don't suspect, but it's not written. I don't think the way I would have written it, because he was mainly a scientist and not a writer. I mean, he did write
right.
stuff, but he wasn't a fiction writer. That wasn't his main thing. So descriptions are there but sparse. Whereas if I don't give good descriptions on a regular basis, my editor comes and says, "Look, I need more stuff over here."
Yeah,
She's on my case, and I'm going, "Yeah, I know you're right. That's what makes good writing." Um, so yeah, I have a bunch. More are coming as time permits, but like I said, I'm so busy. I have to pick times for when I'm going to do that writing. I think the 4th of July weekend coming up might be another time. I just was planning my vacation in August. That's going to be two solid weeks of hopefully some good solid writing
Nice.
because, like I said, I have a novel sitting on my computer that is 2/3, 3/4 maybe done, 70,000 words approximately.
Hmm.
It was 60 the other day. I looked at it and then I checked again recently. I said, it's 70,000, really? Oh, okay. I did more writing than I thought. That I'm trying to finish, this one takes place after the last novel that's already out there. For those of, in case anybody who sees this has read my stuff, and if not, then
Go read it.
then they can go read it. Right?
Yeah.
Please come to this event in August, and
Yeah.
check me out. Yeah, but these events take place after the last novel that I published. Um, and hook up at the very end. You think things, some of the pieces hook up, so you can see what the connection is of this story to other stuff. But
Well, let
the
me.
book,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. I mean, I'm gonna kind of just
no,
jump topic a little bit because I'm curious. So you were talking about earlier that you went through one publisher that went under, and then you had to get like your rights back for that. How do you go
yep.
about choosing a publisher? And like, did it ever even occur to you that they would like go under? Like, is that?
Well, it's tricky because every publishing house is different. Some won't look at me because they don't know who I am.
Hmm.
Some require going through an agent. Um, can't find an agent to save my life that wants to take me on because again, who the hell am I? So you have to wait for a lot of folks have realized that unless they let new talent in, eventually they're out of business because they don't have new talent.
Right.
Right, right. So they have these open periods where they'll take anything. Okay, I just submitted my first poetry collection to a publishing house who's having an open reading period this month for exactly that purpose. It's like, look, they have to be open to submission um, for one. Otherwise, there's no point. If they're close to submission, it's either they're not even going to get it, or it's going to end up in the pile, and you don't ever want it in that pile because that pile never gets touched. They have this big of unread. The way this works is, um, this could be urban legend kind of things, or this could be real. It's hard. Having never worked at a publishing company, I can't be sure, but I suspect it might be a little bit of both. There's this big pile of unread stuff that they get that either has been looked at briefly and rejected, or something else is wrong with it and it just goes to the pile, and then it's basically in a black hole, and you might as well just don't bother them because they won't know who you are. So you have to pick your times. That's one thing, and so you have to do your work. There are a lot of resources to figure out what publishing houses are available, what they take, when they're open. I look for, and of course, I'm connected with other writers who also look
Hmm.
for opportunities. And so when they tell me stuff, sometimes I check it out. This last time, I just happened to be looking. I think this was in May. I just happened to be looking at some of the resources um, that got posted in one of the groups I'm connected with on Discord. Um, and I was checking out a bunch of links, and one of them said, "Yeah, they're going to have an open read in June, and they want poetry." And I said, "Well, you know, so far I've only been self-publishing my poetry. Maybe I could actually get that stuff published too by a regular publisher. That would be kind of nice, I think." So I waited. I formatted it the way they wanted it to. They tell you what to do. You just have to pay attention. Um, I followed their instructions. Uh, and the first weekend in June, I sent it off, and I got a very nice email back saying, "Thank you, we got it." And they were happy. And the line that really struck me was, "Thank you for trusting us with your work." And I'm going, and I thought my thought was, thank you for taking the time to read my stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really because they may take me, they may not take me. I have no clue. The first volume of poetry is a mix of, excuse me, of stuff from my early days of writing poetry in college through about 2010, maybe approximately.
Yeah.
It's because it took so there were a lot of years where I didn't do any writing. Um, More recently, when I decided to get serious about the novel writing, the poetry stuff came back to me. It's kind of like riding a bike, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like they always say, right? You never forget. Um, Although I don't think I would be riding a bike anytime soon myself. I am too much of a klutz. Um, so it took me a while to collect enough poems for that first volume. That's why it took so long. What I found is that the more I do it, the faster it comes. Like more, I get more thoughts for poems. The second volume came only in a couple of years, and then this last volume, which I thought was going to take forever as well, only got finished as quickly as it did because I found while everyone was locked down, I would go through some old notebooks from college as I was rearranging and cleaning up in the house because I had time to do so. I found a bunch of stuff going. These poems are pretty good. I could publish these. There you go. Suddenly
it's
I
a,
have
it's always fun looking at
30 or
your old
30,
work.
30 new
Yeah.
30. Yeah, I got like a third of the book done, in an afternoon because all I have to do is, type them up. Because of course in college I didn't have a computer.
Yeah.
Personal personal computers didn't exist at that time.
I always find looking back at some of my work, it's interesting because some of the things that I really loved, I now hate. And some of the things that I hated, I'm like, oh, it's not as bad
Well,
as I thought it was.
well, um, some things require some things get better with age, and some things spoil.
Yeah.
It works both ways. Additionally, you as a person are changing. Um, as you go through life, all of your experiences, so that the person that you sort of start out as might be very similar to the person you are now, but there are certain experiences that have altered you in small, possibly subtle ways. You know, um, and it may also be that you read a really good book on a particular type of story that got you interested in that genre
Right.
that years ago you never would have touched.
Sure.
That happens.
Yeah.
That's called life. So,
Um, do you find yourself kind of bringing old ideas that from your old notebooks into the new novels, or trying to, I don't want to say rehash because that's not the right word, but maybe things that didn't pan out in
well,
previous stories?
that's an interesting question because clearly, um, well, let's back up. Let's back up. Okay, so I've been collecting story ideas that I've had for years. I first discovered my love of writing in like high school or junior high school in the midish. I'm gonna say midish 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I've started to pay attention when I had an idea. Many of those ideas I've come to realize are are very little value. Most of them, many of them, because they're derivative of my experience at that time, which was limited.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that a good writer needs is a fair amount of life experience, which most people don't get until they, let's say, go to college, do some traveling, stuff like that.
Have some tragedy.
So
I feel like tragedy is very important to life
yeah,
experience.
that's
Yeah.
that's also, yes, the deaths of loved ones gives you perspective as well, teaches you several important lessons, all of those things. Um, your first girlfriend, those first early relationships, then you break up, and how do you feel, and all that stuff that goes into the makeup of, at a very deep core level of people. You need all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to be drawing from it later, mostly, is what I found. But more to the point is that I didn't have the writing skills until many years after I finished school, because it takes a while for you to hone those skills. And so what I found is, going back, which I did occasionally, I realized that some of the stuff just is just no good. I keep the stuff just because you never know. but some of it is just no damn good. And other little bits. Occasionally, there are little pearls or little gems, little bits of something that's like, well, that's a good idea. I'm not quite sure how to do that. How I would fit that into something else. Let's put that over here. Let's put that on the keep list. Um, the poems from college, which I didn't think were good at the time, in retrospect, I looked at them fresh. I'm going, okay, some of them were just fine as is, and others like that needs work. I was on to something, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
One of the other things that happens is with age and experience, you get to you're able to identify good stuff from bad stuff. If you read enough stuff, you can pick out good stuff from bad stuff pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Um,
And I feel like you have a better idea of why it's bad, not just like, oh, this is garbage, but like, oh,
well, it's like, I shouldn't, I won't mention any names here, but yes, I bought a book, the first book of a fantasy series from this. Let's see, this was somewhere in the middle of the whole Harry Potter thing.
mm-hmm.
Um, because he was a new writer. This kid um, was publishing a fantasy series, and I bought the first book to see what he did with it. Um, and what I found, I came away with is like, this is derivative. This is so freaking derivative. How is this published?
Yeah.
And I think I couldn't finish the first novel. It kept reminding me of Star Wars.
I think I know who you're talking about
That's all I'm going to say.
because
That's all I'm going to
I
say.
didn't read the book. I saw probably the first half. Was this made into a movie?
Probably most of these things.
First half of a movie, and I'm like, this is Star Wars with dragons.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
It's probably the same thing. We're not mentioning any names.
No, no, no.
Okay. Sections of the book are great, right? They're talking to the bard. The bard's giving some background to the world. That's great. The part with the main character and what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Star Wars. It was legit stuff. It was so derivative.
I have to remind myself this character is not named Luke.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was so. It wasn't even like, there's things where you're like, oh, this is like such and such, or that reminds me of. This is like this
well,
is almost word for word.
And that's fine. It can certain things can think you can okay. And I've taken bits and pieces.
Yeah, I think everyone does. Yeah,
I've taken bits and pieces from my fantasy novels. What you're going to find is my elves are very much like Tolkien elves. Okay, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
Okay, I split them into two political groups basically, and they're fighting each other. You don't see that in Tolkien.
Right.
That's one. Okay, I borrowed the concept of the Order of Saint Michael from Catherine Kurtz and her Durini series, because they're the logical people to fight evil, and I put necromancers in the story. Perfect fit. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, but that Order of Saint Michael is not like her Order of Saint Michael. Because she has bits and pieces that are deeply embedded in her head, probably that never saw the book. Mm-hmm. I don't know a thing about. I said, okay, look, I'm going to have some religious knights, and they're going to be they're going to be named after some of the archangels. Okay, very simple.
Yeah,
very simple. Which is basically what she's doing. It's that idea. It's just okay, and the mix of the fact that you get all of this stuff all mixed together, shaken well, means I got something that's very different from anything you probably have ever read.
Right.
Because the story should not be derivative of anything, and shouldn't remind you of anything other than this is a typical fantasy story set in the cast in the mold of most fantasy stories, where it's a good versus evil. The guys have to go do something, but of course there are obstacles and so on and so forth, and there's a prophecy and all kinds of stuff. And so you'll meet elves and dwarves and wizards and all kinds of stuff. You expect all of that.
You're right. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a certain amount of like shorthand where you're not going to create an elf that's short with not pointy ears and dragon wings that's covered in fur, because you're going to be like, the reason why you called it an elf is to kind of capture that
Okay.
shorthand that
Well,
everyone understands what an elf is.
fantasy, much of fantasy rests on the shoulders of mythologies that we all know,
Mm-hmm.
right? Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and so on. And so, in many cases, I try to be true to the mythology, the
Yeah.
original sources, when I can. In the case of elves, because elves only show up in Norse mythology, and I don't particularly like those elves.
Yeah.
I much prefer Tolkien elves. I make some exceptions, but I know I'm making those exceptions.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to know the rules and know when to break
To
them.
break
That's
them.
one
Yep.
thing.
I agree.
Okay, but the dwarves that I have are right out of the Ring cycle. Um, you know, they might as well be the ones mining the Rheingold out of the Wagner opera. I'm going, okay, guys, that's exactly what dwarves ought to be.
Yeah.
Um, it's basically also matches what Tolkien does because he was aware of all of those kinds of myths, and so it's all consistent. Okay, with a little bit of influence from things like D&D and role playing, which I've also done a fair amount of. Um, and that's the thing is that um, you got to meet your readers' expectations to some degree, or they're going to look at it and go, "Ugh."
Yeah.
And if they really look at it and says, "I've read this before, but it was called something else and it was done better," then
Yeah.
I have friends of mine who read the series that I was just talking about, and in the third book, um, I heard one of them say, "I can't read this anymore. It's too," and I'm surprised she got to book 3. Frankly,
Yeah.
I couldn't make it to book 1, but at the end of the third book, she loudly closed the thing. She was sitting in my living room. She closed the thing and says, "I can't read this anymore. It's too derivative. It's no good." That's the end of it. And I'm going, thinking to myself, "Well, you made it farther than I did. Congratulations."
It's funny that, I was at least hoping that it would, level off and get more to its own story in the other books. I was just I just couldn't get through the first.
Yeah, it's the problem in that particular story is that the person who is credited with as the author doesn't have the skill, and so the only reason it was published originally is
Mm-hmm.
because his parents had a publishing house, or
Oh.
they did a lot of rewrites, and
Yeah.
I suspect the parts that are good are their rewrites.
Yeah.
Okay, now he's gone on to write other stuff, and I don't know how popular he is or anything. I haven't bothered with any more of his stuff because you only have to disappoint me once,
Right. Yeah.
right? If you impress me, then I'm a loyal fan. I have I've spent years trying to find everything Ray Bradbury, for example, has written because his stuff is awesome,
And I feel
right?
like if they impress you, then when they fall a little short, sometimes you're like, that's okay. That happens,
Yeah, but generally speaking, well, here's the thing. It depends on the piece because not everything that Bradbury writes, for example, is something that I really love. But he's writing for different magazines mostly, and then his
Mm-hmm.
short stories are collected into books. And so I have to remember that well, the to evaluate each story as a sort of a thing unto itself, okay,
Yeah.
and to see what he's actually doing. The exceptions are things like Fahrenheit 451, which is a novel in its own right, and
Mm-hmm.
either you like that story or you don't. It's a little dark for me, but that's me. Um, um, and so it really depends on um, uh, what the individual writer does. And yeah, if they disappoint, forget it. I'm not going to give you. I probably won't give you a second chance. But if it's good, then I'm gonna mine it because good writers, if they're prolific, um, it's worth doing. So I look for their series. I look for um, all kinds of stuff that they've done. You can go several years reading nothing but Pern novels, and there you are because she wrote so much stuff,
Yeah.
right? And if you like dragons, and frankly, who doesn't like dragons? Come on.
Everybody likes
Um,
dragons. I
yeah.
think Game of Thrones like proved that.
Well, there you go. Um, that's a perfect case of the thick book. The thick book. All of those are small telephone books.
Yeah.
Um, but they've been popularized because of the HBO series.
Hmm.
That yeah, uh, um, George Martin has done so much to turn people on to fantasy, which I was hoping somebody would do because let's face it, science fiction was suffering until Star Wars came along,
Yeah.
and then Star Wars basically reawakened, and I was hoping that was going to happen in the fantasy genre, and I think it may have finally hit. And it wasn't the Lord of the Rings movies at the beginning of this century. I think it was really Game of Thrones on TV that really put it over the top
Yeah.
because it was so popular. The problem is that, at least for my taste, that story is very cutthroat and not as
Oh, to say the least. Yeah.
yeah, it's very cutthroat and is not my taste. Um, Even though I will sometimes describe my work as well, if you like Game of Thrones,
Hmm.
it's not as bloodthirsty.
Yeah.
You people aren't dying left and right. Okay, your favorite characters won't be killed out from under you, but it's many of the same elements are there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. Rich, I mean, this time has flown. I feel like we just scratched the surface, and hopefully our listeners feel the same way. So they can come out to Pages and Pints on August 20th at Mayflower Brewing Company and
sure.
meet you there and chit chat and pick up your
And continue
books,
this conversation. Absolutely.
collector's
I'm
items, no less.
well, yeah. Well, for the novels,
Yeah.
or you can buy revised editions of my short story collections or the poetry if you're into that. Um, yeah, because once the novels are gone, they're gone. I have to wait for my current publisher to reissue at least the first two,
Yeah.
so that I'll have more books. Hopefully, I won't sell out here because I got your other event in September.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Have,
Yeah.
have inventory for that one too.
Yeah. Where
So
can people go to find out more of what you're working on? And I'm assuming you have a website of some kind.
yes, I do. Feitelberg.net.
Feitelberg.
.net, right?
Yep.
List the homepage lists all the books right up front. You can also go to Amazon, of course, and search. You search
Hmm.
for my name. You might want to uh, put up a little I don't know what they call it in the TV in the flash the name of the person up on the screen there. If you have post production,
Oh, this only goes out as audio, so
it goes off.
they'll have
Well,
your
then never
name in the
mind.
show description. Yeah,
Then
yeah,
never mind.
yeah.
I'm getting confused because I'm seeing your face
Okay.
over the internet here. Right. Um, um, right. So if they go to Amazon and search for my name, they can find me that way.
Yep.
I'm not. I go back and forth on if I'm in other bookstores online.
Hmm.
Um, because for the most part, the only way I sell is to doing these events like you're going to have.
Yep.
Is that's where I make most of my money.
Hmm.
Is that I go there, I press the flesh, I shake hands, I talk to people, they like what they hear, they say, yeah, I'll try it, and I make some money. Um, this time it's a little different because, like I said, yeah, these novels are when they're gone, they're gone. There's not going to be any more, and um, I have to wait. I have to wait for the new versions. Um, but um, they can always go to my website. There's
Hmm.
contact information there too if they want to actually, find me on social media.
Okay.
Okay, there's also that, and my email address is there too if they have questions about stuff. I get that occasionally from some of my loyal readers, um, because what happened when I knew I was going to sell my rights to that London publisher.
Hmm.
I turned around to all of my readers of the books, right? Because I knew some of them hadn't gotten the last couple of novels because they couldn't.
Yeah.
I said, look, yeah, I'm about to sell my rights. If you want copies, contact me. So that happens, and I don't have a problem with people contacting me
Yeah.
if they want something specifically, because for all I know, somebody will hear this who's read up to book 5 and they want 6, 7, 8, and the only way they're probably going to get that is by talking to me directly now.
Yeah.
That happened to me. I think it was last year that somebody needed a copy of the last book to finish the series, and I didn't have anything in stock, so I had to. The only thing I could do is give them my a proof copy, which they accepted.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the proof copy says proof copy.
That's still pretty cool. I mean, I feel like that. I don't know if I'd rather that, but I feel like that's kind of, if you're a fan, that's a pretty cool thing to have.
I wasn't sure that was acceptable because that wasn't my brother's, but I had no choice because I'm not really bringing these things back into print for legal reasons. Mostly is that they know the London publisher has the rights to everything,
right?
And I need to honor that agreement. That's not to say that I can't do something special for folks if it's just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
So I'm flexible with that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So again, I want to say thank you for coming on the show and chatting. Sure. It was good to catch up.
Thank you for having me. It was a good time. Yeah, it went really fast.
Yeah, those are always the best ones when you're like, oh crap, we're there.
Okay. Well, the next time if you're doing a podcast series for a different event of yours and I'm there, you just let me know.
Absolutely.
We'll talk again.
Or if you got another book coming out, reach out and we'll get you back on.
Oh, okay. I can do that when the one that I'm working on goes out. I'll let you know.
Sweet. Sounds good. And again, our listeners, you can come on down to Pages and Pints at the Mayflower Brewing Company on August 20th and see Rich. You can see myself and enjoy some Mayflower beer and get your read on. And we'll see you guys again next week. And thank you, Rich.
Thank you all. Okay, bye.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. So thanks again for listening.